"You're done here," the manager snapped as she collapsed, clutching her stomach. 43 guests stared, stunned, as he waved the termination slip over her like a weapon. But from the back corner, a silent man in a gray suit stood, and what he did next shattered the entire room's power dynamic. Then, he pulled out that ID badge. What if the very moment someone tries to erase you from existence could become the moment you're reborn into something they never imagined possible? Barbara Spiegel pressed her trembling hands against her stomach. Her yellow service vest now rumpled from where she'd collapsed onto the polished marble floor of the Rossmore Grand Restaurant. At 27, she'd learned to carry invisible weight, the kind that came from working double shifts while growing a life inside her that nobody could know about. Her tray lay scattered beside her, crystal water glasses reflecting the horrified faces of wealthy diners who'd frozen mid-bite. But it wasn't the physical fall that shattered her. It was the manager's final words, delivered loud enough for every table to hear. "We don't hire broken mothers. You're done here." She didn't know that seated 3 tables away, a man in a simple gray suit and modest tie had witnessed everything. William M. Ponder, worth more billions than most people could count, had been sitting quietly near the window, his coffee growing cold. But what he'd just seen made something ancient and fierce awaken in his chest. Something he hadn't felt since his own mother came home crying from a job that fired her for the same reason, 40 years ago. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Barbara had been working at the Rossmore Grand for 9 months, ever since her previous restaurant job couldn't give her enough hours to cover rent. The position barely paid for the cramped studio apartment where eviction notices now piled up beside prenatal vitamins she'd bought with spare change. But it was respectable work, and she'd learned to find dignity in remembering allergies, refilling wine glasses before they emptied, making every guest feel seen. Most customers were kind enough, busy professionals who appreciated efficiency, elderly couples who smiled when she recommended the chef's special. But lately, under Stefan D. Ross's management, something had changed. The restaurant had become less about people and more about performance, and Barbara, with her growing fatigue and occasional morning sickness, was becoming a liability to the brand. William had started visiting the restaurant 3 weeks ago, always ordering the same thing: black coffee, the daily special, nothing flashy. He dressed like a mid-level consultant, drove a rental sedan, and spoke softly when he ordered. Barbara had pegged him as another business traveler, maybe in town for a convention, someone who understood the value of a good meal and better service. She'd noticed his considerate manner, the way he always made eye contact when he said thank you, how he'd quietly leave a $50 bill for a $35 meal without drawing attention. What Barbara didn't know was that William had been visiting restaurants across his entire chain for months, not as the CEO of Ponder Hospitality Group, but as a man trying to understand the culture he'd built from a distance. His company owned 47 upscale establishments across 12 states, but spreadsheets couldn't tell him what he really needed to know about whether his businesses still had souls. He had to feel it. Watch how managers treated staff when they thought no one important was paying attention. See who remembered that luxury should never come at the cost of someone's humanity. Stefan D. Ross, the manager who'd humiliated Barbara, was a fixture at the Rossmore Grand. He'd been there for 2 years, priding himself on maintaining standards and excellence. William had watched his pattern for weeks, the way Stefan spoke to staff like they were props instead of people, how he'd praise wealthy customers while ignoring their rudeness to servers. The calculated cruelty disguised as professionalism. Each incident had made William's jaw tighten a little more. The dismissive comments to the busboy with the accent. The public criticism of a server who'd been 30 seconds too slow. The quiet firing of a hostess who'd asked for time off for her father's funeral, but tonight had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. As Barbara tried to push herself up from the floor, her hands shaking with shock and humiliation, Stefan was already holding the termination notice like a weapon, pointing toward the exit with theatrical disgust. "You've got 5 minutes to collect your things and leave," he announced, loud enough to ensure every diner understood that the Rossmore Grand had standards. "This is a luxury establishment, not a charity for women who can't plan their lives." The dining room remained frozen. 43 customers, dressed in designer clothes and expensive jewelry, watched with a mixture of discomfort and fascination. A few looked away. No one spoke. The woman at table 7 quietly pulled out her phone and tilted it toward the scene, her finger hovering over the record button. That's when William quietly folded his napkin, placed it beside his plate, and stood up from his corner table. William walked slowly across the dining room, his footsteps deliberate and measured against the restaurant's marble floor. Barbara was still on her knees, trying to gather the scattered glasses, her shoulders hunched with the particular shame that comes from being made into a spectacle. Stefan stood over her like a victor, the termination notice still clutched in his hand, already turning his attention back to the wealthy table he'd been courting all evening. "Apologies for the disruption, Mr. Whitmore," Stefan said smoothly to a silver-haired man in a Tom Ford suit. "We maintain very high standards here, and sometimes difficult decisions must be—" "I've been watching you," William said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made the entire restaurant fall silent for the second time in 3 minutes. Stefan's head snapped toward him, confusion flickering across his polished features. "Excuse me?" "For 3 weeks," William continued, his tone still calm, but now edged with something that made several diners unconsciously lean forward. "I've watched you treat your staff like they're disposable, like they're less than human, like their dignity is negotiable." His words weren't angry. They were something deeper, the kind of controlled disappointment that cuts through noise better than any shout. Stefan's face hardened with indignation. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is none of your concern. If you have a complaint about service, you can fill out a comment card like everyone else. Now, if you'll excuse me—" He turned back toward Barbara, who had managed to stand, but was now clutching the edge of a table for balance, her face pale, one hand instinctively protective over her stomach. "Ma'am, I said 5 minutes. Do you need security to escort you out?" Barbara's eyes welled with fresh tears. She'd endured this kind of treatment because she needed this job desperately. The eviction notice had given her 2 weeks. Her car payment was overdue. She'd already pawned her grandmother's ring just to buy groceries. She couldn't afford to lose even 1 day's pay, let alone challenge someone with power over her survival. But as she opened her mouth to apologize, to somehow make this better, to beg one more time, William gently stepped between her and Stefan. "No," he said simply. "Barbara, you don't need to leave. You don't need to apologize, and you certainly don't need to justify your existence to someone who mistakes cruelty for leadership." He looked directly at Stefan, and something in his gray eyes made the manager instinctively take a step back. "This woman has worked here for 9 months. She shows up early. She remembers customer preferences. She treats every person who walks through that door with respect, something I notice you only extend to people you think matter." William's voice remained steady. "The difference between her and you, Stefan, is that she understands what service actually means. She serves people with dignity. You serve your own ego." Stefan's face flushed red. "Who the hell do you think you are, talking to me like that? You're just another customer with an opinion and a credit card. I run this restaurant. I maintain these standards, and I have every right to make personnel decisions without interference from—" "You're absolutely right," William interrupted, his tone still maddeningly calm. "Managers absolutely have the right to make personnel decisions." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. From it, he extracted a corporate ID card and held it up so both Stefan and the surrounding tables could see clearly. "But owners have a few rights, too." Stefan's eyes fixed on the card. Then his face drained of color faster than wine spilling across white linen. "William M. Ponder, Chief Executive Officer, Ponder Hospitality Group." The restaurant remained completely silent, but the quality of that silence had changed. Several customers gasped. The woman at table 7 stopped recording and stared, her mouth slightly open. 2 servers near the kitchen entrance stood frozen, one with her hand over her mouth. William's voice, when he spoke again, had lost none of its calm control. But now it carried the unmistakable authority of someone who'd just revealed he owned every chair, every table, every polished surface in the room. "I own this restaurant. Stefan, I own the entire chain, and you just publicly humiliated a pregnant employee on the floor of my establishment. Not because she failed at her job, but because her life became inconvenient to your image." Stefan's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. The termination notice slipped from his fingers and fluttered to the floor. William turned to Barbara, and his voice softened in a way that made her tears spill over again. But this time, they were different tears. "Barbara, you're not fired. In fact, as of this moment, you're on paid leave for as long as you need. And when you're ready to return, we're going to have a conversation about a new position, one where you help me ensure that what just happened here never happens to anyone else in any restaurant I own." He looked back at Stefan, whose face had gone from pale to gray. "Stefan D. Ross, you're terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. You have 5 minutes to collect your things." The irony of using Stefan's own words wasn't lost on anyone in the room. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Stefan opened his mouth, perhaps to argue, perhaps to threaten legal action, perhaps simply to salvage some shred of dignity, but no words came. He looked around the dining room at the faces staring back at him, some satisfied, some shocked, all witnessing his fall from power. Without another word, he turned and walked stiffly toward the staff area, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble with each humiliating step. But William wasn't finished yet. As the restaurant slowly began to return to its normal rhythm, quiet conversations resuming, forks clinking against plates, the pianist in the corner starting a gentle melody again, Barbara realized her legs were still shaking. She carefully lowered herself into the nearest chair, her hand still protectively curved around her stomach, trying to process what had just happened. William gestured to one of the servers. "Please, bring Barbara some water and the chef's special. And let the staff know there's a team meeting in 30 minutes. Then he pulled out the chair across from Barbara and sat down, his expression gentle in a way that made her throat tighten with emotion she couldn't name. "You didn't have to do that," Barbara whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "I could have handled it. I've been handling worse for months." William's expression softened with something that looked like old pain and new purpose combined. "I know you could have. You've been handling it with more grace than most people could manage, but Barbara—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Just because you can endure something doesn't mean you should have to. And just because you've learned to survive being treated as less than, doesn't mean you were ever anything less than deserving of dignity." He gestured toward the table where he'd been sitting for 3 weeks, watching everything. "I've been coming here because I needed to understand what kind of culture I'd allowed to grow in my own company. I built this business to give people jobs, to create spaces where families could celebrate, where communities could gather. But somewhere along the way, I got too far away from the people who actually make those spaces work." Barbara looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly. "I almost lost everything tonight. My job, my apartment, my ability to provide for my baby. All because her voice cracked. "All because I exist in a way that wasn't convenient." "No," William said firmly. "You almost lost everything because someone with power chose to abuse it. But that changes now. Not just for you, for everyone working in every restaurant I own." He reached across the table, not touching her, but extending his hand palm up in invitation. "I meant what I said. When you're ready, I want to offer you something more than just your job back. I want you to help me build something new. A program that protects people like you, that values employees as humans first, not just labor units, that ensures no one is punished for being pregnant, for being sick, for being human." Barbara looked up at him, and for the first time in 9 months, maybe longer, she saw something she'd almost forgotten existed: possibility. "Weitha," she asked, "why would you do all this for someone you don't even know?" William's eyes held a distant sadness. "Because 40 years ago, my mother came home from her job at a factory, crying. She was pregnant with my little sister. They fired her the same way Stefan just tried to fire you, publicly, cruelly, as an example to everyone else. She didn't have anyone to stand up for her. She lost that job, and it nearly broke our family." He met Barbara's gaze directly. "I built this company promising myself that if I ever had power, I'd use it to make sure what happened to her never happened to anyone else. Tonight, I realized I'd been so focused on building an empire that I'd forgotten to protect the people holding it up." Barbara felt something shift inside her, not just relief or gratitude, but the first stirring of hope she'd felt in longer than she could remember. A server approached with water and a beautifully plated meal. William stood, preparing to give Barbara space to process and eat. "Take your time," he said gently. "Rest. Eat. When you're ready, we'll talk about the future. But tonight, you're safe. Your job is secure. And tomorrow, we start rebuilding. Not just this restaurant, but the entire company culture." As he turned to address the gathered staff members near the kitchen, Barbara placed one hand on her stomach and picked up the glass of water with the other. The moment that was supposed to destroy her had somehow become the moment everything changed. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now, back to the story. Barbara sat alone at the corner table, the untouched meal growing cold in front of her, and let herself remember what life looked like before everything fell apart. 18 months ago, she'd been different. Lighter. She'd worked at Marco's Bistro on 5th Street, a neighborhood place where regulars knew her name and she knew theirs. Mrs. Chen always ordered the minestrone. The Thompson family came every Friday for their daughter's favorite pasta. Barbara had loved that job, loved the way serving people felt less like labor and more like hospitality. She'd been saving money back then, had plans. A small apartment, with actual sunlight. Maybe culinary school someday. Then she met Daniel. He was charming in that dangerous way, the kind of man who made promises feel like poetry. He talked about futures and adventures, about leaving this town and starting something bigger. She'd believed him because she'd wanted to. When Marco's closed down after the owner's heart attack, Daniel said it was a sign. They'd figure it out together. 3 months later, she was pregnant. 3 days after that, Daniel was gone. No note, no forwarding address. Just an empty side of the closet and a text message that said, "I'm not ready for this. I'm sorry." Barbara had stared at that message for hours, waiting for more words that never came, waiting for him to come back with an explanation, an apology, anything. But some people, she learned, were built for beginnings, not for staying. The bills didn't care about her broken heart. Rent came due. The pregnancy made her nauseous and exhausted. She took 2 jobs, one at a coffee shop opening at 5 a.m., another at a hotel restaurant closing at midnight. She worked through morning sickness by keeping crackers in her apron, worked through fatigue by splashing cold water on her face every hour, worked until her feet bled inside her shoes because stopping meant losing everything. When the Rossmore Grand offered her a position, one job, decent pay, respectable hours, she'd cried from relief. For the first 2 months, it felt like salvation. The restaurant was elegant, the customers were interesting, and she was good at her job. She remembered orders without writing them down, anticipated needs before guests asked, made people feel cared for in a way that reminded her why she'd chosen this work in the first place. Then Stefan became manager. He didn't see servers as people. He saw them as set pieces. The dining room was his stage, and anyone who disrupted the aesthetic was disposable. When Barbara's uniform didn't fit quite right anymore, he noticed. When she moved a little slower, needed an extra bathroom break, he noticed. She started wearing looser clothes, standing straighter despite the back pain, smiling through the exhaustion that made her bones ache. She hid her pregnancy like it was a crime, because in Stefan's restaurant, being human was exactly that. The dream of stability had become the reality of survival, and tonight, she'd learned that sometimes survival requires someone else believing you deserve more than just existing in the shadows of other people's comfort. Stefan D. Ross had a philosophy. Excellence wasn't optional. It was survival. In the cutthroat world of upscale dining, he believed, there was no room for weakness, excuses, or anything that disrupted the carefully curated illusion of effortless perfection. He'd built his reputation on it. Tables gleaming without a single fingerprint. Staff moving like synchronized dancers. Every guest interaction scripted for maximum satisfaction. The Rossmore Grand had won Best Fine Dining Experience 2 years running under his management, and Stefan wore that achievement like armor. But excellence, as Stefan defined it, came at a cost the staff paid daily. Marcus, the line cook with 12 years of experience, had made the mistake of requesting 3 days off for his daughter's wedding. Stefan fired him the next morning. "Family emergencies are understandable," Stefan had said coldly. "But celebrations? Plan your personal life around your professional obligations, not the other way around." Teresa, a hostess who'd worked there for 4 years, developed a limp after a minor car accident. Stefan kept her for 2 weeks, just long enough to train her replacement, then let her go during the lunch rush with a single sentence. "Our guests expect beauty and grace at every touch point. You're no longer providing either." No one protested. No one dared. Because jobs at the Rossmore Grand paid better than most restaurants, and in a city where rent climbed faster than wages, people swallowed their dignity to keep their apartments. The staff learned to fear him with a particular kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes from walking on eggshells that regenerate faster than you can avoid them. Stefan noticed Barbara's changes before she realized he was watching. The way she paused slightly longer at table edges, how her hand occasionally pressed against her lower back during long shifts, the faint green tinge to her complexion some mornings, the looser-fitting uniform that no longer hugged her frame the way it had 3 months prior. He said nothing at first, just watched, catalogued, waited for the right moment. That moment came on a Tuesday evening when Barbara, carrying a tray of champagne flutes, suddenly swayed and had to grip the bar counter for balance. The nausea had hit without warning, a rolling wave that turned the room sideways for 3 terrible seconds. Stefan materialized beside her like a shark sensing blood in the water. "My office, now!" Inside his immaculate workspace, everything perpendicular, every surface sterile, Stefan didn't offer her a chair. He stood behind his desk, hands clasped, studying her the way a jeweler might examine a flawed diamond. "You're pregnant." It wasn't a question. Barbara's silence was confirmation enough. "Do you understand what kind of establishment this is, Barbara?" His voice carried the patient condescension of a teacher explaining basic concepts to a failing student. "We're not a diner. We're not a family restaurant with sticky high chairs and screaming children. We are a luxury brand. Our guests pay premium prices for a premium experience, and that includes the aesthetic of our service staff." "I can still do my job." "Can you?" Stefan leaned forward. "Because what I'm seeing is someone who can barely stand for a full shift. Someone whose uniform doesn't fit properly. Someone who's going to start showing in a matter of weeks. And then what? You think our clientele wants to be served by a visibly pregnant waitress? You think that projects the image we've worked so hard to cultivate?" Barbara's hands clenched at her sides. "I need this job." "Then you should have been more careful." His words landed like stones. "This isn't a charity, Barbara. This is a luxury brand. And pregnant waitresses don't belong on the floor of establishments like this. They belong at diners and family chains, places where expectations are lower and appearances matter less." He opened a drawer, pulled out a personnel file, hers, and made a show of flipping through it. "You're good at what you do. I'll acknowledge that, but good doesn't override inappropriate. I'm giving you 2 weeks to figure something out. Find different work. Have a convenient miscarriage. I honestly don't care which. But you will not be here, serving my guests, looking like that." Barbara felt something crack inside her chest. Not her spirit, but her last illusion that competence and dedication mattered more than appearances. 2 weeks, Stefan repeated, closing the file with finality. "Make them count. William M." Ponder had learned a long time ago that power makes people invisible to those who wield it. For 6 months, he'd been traveling across the country, visiting the 47 restaurants in his chain, not as a CEO conducting inspections, but as a ghost moving through his own empire. He wore modest suits from department stores, drove rental cars, paid cash, never corrected anyone who assumed he was a sales consultant or regional manager passing through town. The Rossmore Grand was his 9th stop, and it troubled him more than the others. On his first visit, he'd watched a busboy named Miguel apologize profusely for refilling a water glass from the wrong side. The customer hadn't noticed. Stefan had. The dressing down happened in full view of the dining room, a calculated humiliation designed to remind everyone who held power. On his third visit, he'd observed a young couple celebrating their anniversary. They'd ordered the cheapest wine on the menu. Stefan had assigned them to the table near the kitchen, the one where servers passed constantly, where conversations competed with clattering dishes. The message was clear. If you can't afford to be impressive, you don't deserve ambiance. On his fifth visit, he'd seen a hostess's hands shake as she greeted guests, her smile bright and brittle as glass about to shatter. The staff at the Rossmore Grand moved like people expecting punishment. They were excellent at their jobs. William could see that immediately. But excellence here was fueled by fear, not passion. And fear, William knew, was the most expensive ingredient in any business. It cost loyalty. It cost creativity. It cost the very humanity that made hospitality meaningful. Then there was Barbara. He'd noticed her during his second visit, not because she was different in appearance, but because she was different in presence. While other servers performed their duties with mechanical precision, Barbara seemed to actually see people. She refilled water glasses before guests realized they were empty, remembered that the gentleman at table 12 was allergic to shellfish without checking her notes, noticed when the elderly woman by the window struggled to read the menu in dim lighting, and quietly brought her a small reading lamp without being asked. But it was the moment with the child that sealed William's attention. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, had started crying during her family's meal. Overtired, overwhelmed by the formal atmosphere. Her parents looked mortified, frantically trying to calm her while other diners cast annoyed glances. Stefan had started moving toward the table with the clear intention of suggesting they leave. Barbara got there first. She knelt beside the child's chair, eye level, and spoke softly. William couldn't hear the words, but he watched the little girl's tears slow. Barbara pulled a small pad from her apron and drew something, a quick sketch that made the child giggle. Then she brought crayons from somewhere, transformed the expensive linen into an impromptu coloring activity, and suddenly the crisis was over. The parents were grateful. The child was calm. The dining room relaxed. Stefan had glared at Barbara for the remainder of the evening. William had left an extra-large tip and made a note in the small journal he carried. Barbara Spiegel understands that hospitality is about people, not performance. Over the following weeks, he'd watched her operate in Stefan's oppressive environment like a candle refusing to be extinguished. She remained kind when kindness wasn't rewarded. She treated every guest with dignity, whether they ordered the most expensive bottle or just coffee and dessert. And William watched Stefan punish her for it in 1,000 small ways. The worst sections, the most demanding tables, the impossible standards applied with surgical precision. On William's 17th visit, he'd seen something that made his decision crystallize. Barbara had been carrying a heavy tray, visibly struggling. Another server, a young man named Alex, had moved to help her. Stefan's voice had cut across the dining room. Barbara is perfectly capable. Unless you're suggesting she's incompetent, Alex? Alex had frozen. Barbara had lifted the tray alone, her arms trembling with effort, her face pale. No guest had noticed. They never did. But William had. And in that moment, he'd understood something fundamental. The workers tell the truth about a business, not the revenue reports, not the online reviews, not the managers who present carefully curated narratives to corporate. The workers, how they're treated, how they treat others, whether they have room to be human. They reveal what a company actually values beneath all its polished words. Stefan valued image over people, control over compassion, his own authority over everyone else's dignity. And William had seen enough. Barbara knew something was wrong the moment she stepped into the kitchen that Friday evening. The world tilted sideways. The fluorescent lights became too bright, the sounds of sizzling pans too loud. She gripped the edge of the stainless steel counter, breathing slowly through her nose, willing the dizziness to pass. It didn't. Her vision tunneled. The floor seemed to rise and fall like ocean waves. She'd skipped lunch, couldn't afford to buy food, and the staff meals had been cut from the budget 2 months ago. Cost efficiency, Stefan had called it. "You good?" Marco, one of the line cooks, looked at her with concern. "Yeah, just need a second." She didn't have a second. The dining room was fully booked. Friday nights were the busiest, the most demanding, the most unforgiving. Table 9 needed their entrees. Table 14 was waiting for dessert menus. Table 6 had asked for her specifically because she'd remembered their daughter's birthday last month. Barbara pushed off the counter, steadied herself, and reached for the tray of dishes. That's when Stefan appeared in the doorway, his expression already set to disapproval. "Problem?" "No, sir. I'm fine." "You don't look fine. You look like you're about to faint." His voice carried no concern, only irritation at the inconvenience. "How long have you been standing there?" "I was just... Pregnancy is not my problem, Barbara. Guests first, excuses later." He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper. "You begged me for 2 weeks. I gave them to you. That doesn't mean you get to waste time leaning on counters while customers wait. If you can't handle a Friday dinner service, you shouldn't be here at all." Barbara felt tears prick her eyes, from frustration, from exhaustion, from the crushing unfairness of needing this job while being punished for being human. "I can handle it." "Then prove it. Table 9, now." She lifted the tray, 3 entrees, perfectly plated, steam rising from the dishes. It felt heavier than it should. Her arms trembled slightly, but she steadied them through sheer will. Back in the dining room, the usual Friday energy buzzed around her. Laughter from the bar area. The gentle clink of wine glasses. Soft jazz playing through hidden speakers. The Rossmore Grand at its finest. A carefully orchestrated performance of luxury. Barbara moved toward table 9, focusing on each step. Don't think about the dizziness. Don't think about the nausea. Don't think about... Her foot caught on something. A chair leg pulled out too far. A briefcase handle. She'd never be sure. The world exploded in slow motion. The tray tilted. 3 plates slid forward, defying her desperate attempt to rebalance. Crystal glasses tumbled. Food and silverware launched through the air in a catastrophic arc. The crash echoed through the entire restaurant like a thunderclap. 40 conversations stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned. Barbara stood frozen in the aftermath, surrounded by shattered porcelain and scattered food, her hands still raised in the position where the tray had been seconds before. The white tablecloth at table 9 was now decorated with red wine sauce and broken glass. "Oh my God," someone whispered. The elderly couple at table 9 looked startled but not angry, more concerned than upset. But their reaction didn't matter. What mattered was Stefan's face as he emerged from the kitchen doorway. William, seated 3 tables away, set down his coffee cup and leaned forward slightly. At table 7, a woman in her 30s quietly pulled out her phone, angled it toward the scene, and pressed record. Stefan crossed the dining room with the purposeful stride of someone about to make an example. His expression was set, not surprised, not disappointed. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the justification he needed. "Barbara, his voice carried across the silent restaurant. "Step back from the table." "I'm so sorry. I can clean this up. It was an accident." "Step back." She did, her legs unsteady, that dizziness returning with a vengeance. Stefan turned to table 9 with practiced grace. "My sincerest apologies. Your meals will be replaced immediately, compliments of the house, and we'll provide a gift certificate for your next visit." Then he turned back to Barbara, and his voice changed, louder now, meant for an audience. "You've been a liability for weeks. Today, you've become a danger to our guests and our reputation." He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket, the termination notice he'd been carrying, waiting for this exact opportunity. "You're done here." Barbara's knees buckled. She reached for a chair but missed, her hand clutching at air. The floor rushed up to meet her, and she collapsed onto the polished marble with a sound that made several guests gasp. Her yellow service vest twisted around her as she fell. One hand instinctively moved to protect her stomach. The other tried to catch her weight, but failed. She ended up on her knees, head bowed, surrounded by broken glass and scattered food. A perfect picture of humiliation. The termination notice fluttered down and landed beside her. And in that moment, with the entire restaurant frozen in horror, Barbara looked up at Stefan through tears and said the words that would change everything. "Please, don't fire me. I'm pregnant." Stefan stood over Barbara's crumpled form, holding the termination notice like a trophy. The paper trembled slightly in his hand, not from nervousness, but from the adrenaline of righteous authority. "Please," Barbara's voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "Please, I need this job. I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Every person in the restaurant heard them. The elderly couple at table 9, the business professionals at the bar, the young family near the window, the woman with her phone still recording at table 7. Stefan's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened into something closer to disgust. "You're pregnant." He repeated the words slowly, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "Which is exactly why this," he gestured broadly at the mess surrounding them, "was inevitable. You can't handle the physical demands. You can't maintain our standards. You've become a liability." He waved the termination notice in front of her face, close enough that Barbara had to pull back to focus on it. "We don't hire broken mothers here, Barbara." The phrase landed like a slap. Several customers flinched. A woman near the entrance put her hand over her mouth. At the bar, a man in a business suit looked away, uncomfortable. But no one spoke. No one moved. Barbara clutched her stomach with one hand, the other still pressed against the floor for balance. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the shame that burned hotter than any physical pain. "I can do better. I'll work harder, please. I have an eviction notice. I have bills. I don't have anywhere else to." "Then you should have thought of that sooner." Stefan's smirk was small but unmistakable, the expression of someone who believed he was teaching a valuable lesson about consequences and personal responsibility. "Maybe next time you'll make better choices. Actions have consequences, Barbara, and yours have finally caught up with you." He pointed toward the exit with the termination notice, his voice rising just enough to ensure every guest heard clearly. "You have 5 minutes to collect your things and leave the premises. If you're not gone by then, I'll have security escort you out. The Rossmore Grand maintains standards, and you—" He looked her up and down with cold assessment. "No longer meet them." The silence in the restaurant was absolute. 43 people watching. 43 witnesses to calculated cruelty. Barbara tried to push herself up, but her arms gave out. She collapsed back onto her knees, one hand still protecting her stomach, the other reaching for a table edge that was just inches too far away. "Please." The word came out as a sob. Stefan turned away, already dismissing her, already preparing to return to his other duties. The matter was settled. The example was made. Order would be restored. Then a chair scraped against marble. The sound cut through the silence like a knife. Stefan turned, irritation flickering across his features at whoever dared interrupt his moment of authority. William M. Ponder rose from his table near the window. He moved with deliberate slowness, folding his napkin with precise care, and placing it beside his coffee cup. His gray suit was unremarkable. His posture was calm. But something in the way he stood made the entire restaurant shift its attention from Stefan to him. He didn't rush, didn't raise his voice, didn't make any dramatic gestures. He simply walked forward, each step measured and purposeful, until he stood between Barbara and Stefan. His eyes, gray as winter steel, fixed on the manager with an intensity that made Stefan unconsciously take half a step backward. When William spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled. But it carried the kind of dangerous calm that comes right before a storm breaks. "The only person unfit to work here, Stefan." He paused, letting the words settle into every corner of the room. "Is you." Stefan's mouth opened in shock. His hand, still holding the termination notice, dropped slightly. The restaurant held its breath, and William stood there, positioned protectively between Barbara and her tormentor, his expression unchanged, waiting for Stefan's next move. Stefan's shock lasted exactly 3 seconds before his defensive instincts kicked in. "Excuse me?" He straightened his shoulders, reclaiming his authoritative posture. "Who do you think you are? Some kind of hero? A Yelp reviewer with delusions of importance?" A few nervous laughs rippled through the dining room, guests uncertain whether this was still a crisis or becoming entertainment. Stefan's confidence rebuilt itself with each passing second. "Sir, I don't know what kind of white knight fantasy you're living out, but this is a personnel matter. It's none of your concern. Now, if you'll return to your table, I'll have your meal comped for the disruption." "I don't want my meal comped." William's voice remained level, almost conversational. He reached into the inner pocket of his gray suit jacket with the same deliberate calm he'd shown since standing. "But I am very concerned with personnel matters, especially in my own establishments." He withdrew a black leather wallet. From it, he extracted a corporate identification card, embossed, official, unmistakable, and held it up at eye level where Stefan could see it clearly. Then he turned slowly, showing it to the dining room. Several guests leaned forward. The woman at table 7 adjusted her phone to capture it. "My name is William M. Ponder." His voice carried effortlessly through the silent restaurant. "I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Ponder Hospitality Group. I own this restaurant. I own this entire chain. And you, Stefan." He looked directly at the manager whose face had drained of all color, "just publicly fired a pregnant employee on the floor of my business." The transformation in the room was instantaneous. Gasps, whispers. The businessman at the bar set down his drink with a sharp clink. The elderly woman at table 9 covered her mouth with both hands. Several guests pulled out their phones, some to verify, others to document. Stefan's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. The termination notice slipped from his fingers and drifted to the floor like a defeated flag. "That's You're not—" His voice came out strangled, disbelieving. "You've been coming here for weeks. You never said—" "No, I didn't." William's tone remained steady, but now it carried the unmistakable weight of authority. "Because I needed to see the truth, not the performance managers put on during official inspections. The real truth, how you treat people when you think no one important is watching." He looked down at Barbara, still on her knees, tears streaming down her face. But now her expression held something other than despair. Hope, perhaps. Or disbelief. Or both. "Barbara, stand up," William's voice gentled. "Please." She tried, her legs shaking. William extended his hand, not grabbing, offering, and she took it. He helped her to her feet with the care someone might show to something precious and fragile. "Barbara Spiegel, effective immediately. You are not fired. You're on paid medical leave for as long as you need it. When you're ready to return, we'll discuss a new position. One where you help me ensure what just happened here never happens to anyone else in any restaurant I own." Fresh tears spilled down Barbara's cheeks, but her hand instinctively went to her stomach in a protective, grateful gesture. William turned back to Stefan, whose face had progressed from pale to gray. "Stefan D. Ross, you are terminated. Effective immediately, for cause." Each word was precisely delivered. "You have 5 minutes to collect your personal belongings and leave the premises. Security will escort you out." He let that sink in before continuing, his voice now addressing the entire restaurant. "And let me be crystal clear, not just for this establishment, but for every restaurant in this company." William's gaze swept across the room, making eye contact with staff members who'd emerged from the kitchen, with guests who sat transfixed, with the world that was watching through phone cameras. "This company will never punish women for bringing life into the world. We will never treat pregnancy as an inconvenience or a liability. We will never prioritize image over the dignity of the people who make our business possible." The restaurant remained silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the horrified stillness of witnessing cruelty, but the reverent quiet of witnessing justice. Stefan found his voice, weak, desperate. "You can't. I've increased revenue by 18%. Customer satisfaction scores are the highest in the region. I've won awards. You've built excellence on the backs of people you've terrorized," William interrupted. "And that kind of excellence isn't worth having." He nodded toward 2 security personnel who'd appeared near the entrance. "Please escort Mr. Ross out." 3 days later, Barbara sat in an office she'd never imagined entering. The executive suite on the 42nd floor of the Ponder Hospitality Group headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. The furniture was elegant, but comfortable. And William M. Ponder sat across from her, not behind an imposing desk like Stefan would have, but in a chair positioned at equal height to hers. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Barbara placed a hand on her stomach, a gesture that had become instinctive. "Better. The doctor said the stress was making everything worse. Now that I'm not—" She paused, searching for words. "Now that I'm not constantly afraid. The pregnancy symptoms have actually improved." William nodded, something like relief crossing his features. "Good. That's good." He pulled out a folder, but didn't open it immediately. "Barbara, I asked you here because I meant what I said at the restaurant. I want to offer you a position. Not just your old job back. Something different. Something that matters." She leaned forward, curious but cautious. "I'm creating a new division within the company. Employee advocacy and protection. The role would be consultant and program leader. You'd help develop policies that protect workers, especially vulnerable ones. Pregnant employees, single parents, people dealing with medical issues, anyone who's been treated as disposable. Barbara's breath caught. I'm a waitress. I don't have management experience or you have something more valuable than credentials, William interrupted gently. You have lived experience. You know exactly what it feels like to be on the other side of power. You know what workers need, because you've been there, still are there. He finally opened the folder, revealing documents, organizational charts, budget projections. The position comes with full benefits, paid parental leave, flexible scheduling, and a salary that will let you worry less about surviving and more about building something meaningful. Barbara stared at the numbers on the page. It was more than double what she'd made at the Rossmore Grand. The question escaped before she could stop it. Why my toe? William's expression shifted, a shadow of old pain crossing his features. Because 40 years ago, my mother was 7 months pregnant with my sister. She worked at a textile factory, operating machines for 10 hours a day. When she asked for a stool because standing had become too difficult, the floor manager told her pregnant women who couldn't keep up should stay home. His jaw tightened at the memory. She tried to keep working anyway. She needed that job. But one day, she stumbled, nearly fell into the machinery. The manager fired her on the spot, told her she was a safety liability, made her walk out in front of everyone, crying, humiliated. Barbara felt tears prick her eyes, recognizing her own story and his mother's. My father worked 2 jobs trying to cover the income loss. We almost lost our house. My mother spiraled into depression that lasted years. And I watched, powerless, as a child, while a system designed to crush people who didn't fit a convenient mold crushed my family. He looked directly at Barbara. I built this company promising myself that if I ever had power, I'd use it differently. But I got too distant, too focused on growth and profit margins. I forgot that businesses are made of people, not spreadsheets. You reminded me, and now I want you to help me fix what I've allowed to break. Over the following weeks, Barbara began training. She met with HR directors, legal teams, policy experts. She learned about labor law, corporate structure, organizational change management. But more importantly, she started believing she had something valuable to offer. Meanwhile, Stefan's termination had opened floodgates. 17 employees from various Ponder hospitality locations came forward with complaints. Discrimination, wage theft, retaliation for reporting safety concerns. 3 other managers were quietly removed. The company culture began to shift, slowly, painfully, but genuinely. And Barbara, the woman who'd been on her knees begging for her job just weeks before, was helping lead that change. 6 months later, Barbara stood in front of a boardroom filled with executives, her hands resting gently on her rounded belly. She was 8 months pregnant now, visibly and undeniably so. But instead of hiding it beneath oversized clothes or apologizing for taking up space, she wore it with quiet dignity. A navy dress that accommodated her shape, comfortable shoes, her hair pulled back in a simple style that said professional without trying to erase who she was. The 23 people in the room, district managers, regional directors, corporate officers, sat with notebooks open, waiting for her to speak. William sat at the head of the table, but he'd introduced her as the expert, the person they needed to hear from. 6 months ago, Barbara began, her voice steady, I was on my knees in the Rossmore Grand Restaurant, begging not to lose my job because I was pregnant. Today, I'm standing here as the Director of Employee Advocacy for this company, about to tell you how we're going to ensure no one ever experiences what I did. She clicked to the first slide of her presentation. We've spent the past 6 months completely restructuring our employee policies. Paid parental leave, 12 weeks, fully covered for all employees regardless of position. Flexible scheduling for medical needs. Protection against discrimination based on pregnancy, health conditions, or family status. And most importantly, mandatory management training on human dignity. One of the older executives raised his hand. What about operational efficiency? These policies will increase costs. Barbara didn't hesitate. They will, by approximately 7% in the first year. But employee turnover has already dropped by 32%. Training costs are down. And our customer satisfaction scores have increased across every location that's implemented the pilot program. She advanced to the next slide, showing data, testimonials, measurable outcomes. It turns out that when you treat people like they matter, they perform better. Revolutionary concept, I know. A few people smiled. William's expression held unmistakable pride. Barbara continued for another 20 minutes, outlining the rollout plan, addressing concerns, sharing stories from employees whose lives had changed because someone finally chose to prioritize their humanity over corporate image. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, genuine, sustained, the kind that comes from people who've witnessed something transformative. That evening, Barbara returned to the Rossmore Grand for the first time since that terrible night. The restaurant looked different. The lighting was warmer. The staff moved with confidence rather than fear. And above the entrance, a new sign had been installed that morning. The Hope Initiative, Rossmore Grand, First Branch Hope. The name she'd chosen for her daughter, due in 3 weeks. William met her at the entrance, gesturing toward the sign. Every restaurant in the chain will carry the Hope Initiative branding now. But this one, the place where everything changed, this one bears her name. Barbara felt tears well up, but they were the good kind. The kind that came from gratitude and disbelief that life could shift so dramatically. I keep thinking about that night, she said quietly. How I felt like the world was ending. How I couldn't imagine anything beyond the next terrible moment. William stood beside her, both of them looking at the sign illuminated against the darkening sky. The moment they tried to destroy you, he said, echoing words he'd spoken in a press interview last month, became the moment you were reborn. Barbara placed both hands on her belly, feeling her daughter move beneath her palms, hope kicking against the confines of the womb, ready to enter a world that her mother was actively making better. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was rebuilding herself, her future, and the broken systems that had tried to crush her. And somewhere, in 47 restaurants across the country, employees were arriving for their shifts, knowing they would be treated like humans, not inconveniences. That pregnancy wouldn't cost them their livelihoods. That dignity wasn't negotiable. All because one woman fell to her knees and begged. And one man decided to stand up. Barbara smiled, feeling hope kick again. Stronger this time, insistent, alive. Let's go inside, she said. I want to meet the new manager. Make sure they understand what this place stands for now. William opened the door, and together they walked into the Rossmore Grand, not as CEO and victim, but as partners in transformation. The restaurant hummed with life, real life, messy and human, and beautiful. And Barbara, who'd once hidden her pregnancy like a shameful secret, walked through those doors with her head high and her daughter prominent. A living testament to the truth that had changed everything. Humanity isn't a liability. It's the whole point.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.